Harley Bennett had long accepted that the world rarely made room for women who looked like her. Working a modest office job in downtown Chicago, she lived a quiet, predictable life that revolved around spreadsheets, grocery shopping, and evenings spent alone in her small apartment. Years of cruel comments about her weight had quietly eroded her confidence, leaving invisible scars far deeper than anyone could see. Although she often smiled politely at coworkers and strangers, she secretly believed she would never be the woman someone truly desired. Then Jared Tompkins entered her life. They matched on an exclusive dating app, and unlike every other man she had encountered, Jared seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her. Their conversations stretched late into the night, filled with laughter, heartfelt confessions, and playful flirting. He complimented her intelligence, admired her kindness, and repeatedly assured her that he loved women with real curves and authentic beauty. Every thoughtful message slowly dismantled the walls Harley had spent years building around her heart. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to imagine that perhaps happiness had finally found its way to her. When Jared invited her to dinner at one of Chicago's most prestigious Italian restaurants, Harley wanted the evening to be perfect. She spent nearly an entire week's paycheck on a stunning emerald wrap dress after a boutique owner convinced her it highlighted every beautiful curve she had spent years trying to hide. She skipped lunch that day, nervously worried about how she might look. Redid her makeup several times until every detail felt flawless, and rehearsed countless conversations in front of her bedroom mirror. Throughout the afternoon, she imagined how the date might unfold their first embrace. Endless conversations over candlelight. Perhaps even the beginning of a relationship she had always dreamed of. As she stepped into the elegant restaurant that evening, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, and beautifully dressed couples, she felt something she had almost forgotten: confidence. For a brief moment, Harley believed she was exactly where she belonged. That confidence slowly crumbled as the hours passed. 7 o'clock became 8. 8 became 9. By the time the clock approached 10, the ice in her water glass had completely melted. The breadbasket sat untouched, and every hopeful glance toward the entrance ended in disappointment. The waitstaff checked on her repeatedly, their professional smiles gradually turning into expressions of sympathy. Around her, couples laughed over expensive meals, while curious glances drifted toward the lonely woman occupying a table meant for two. Harley forced herself to remain composed, refusing to let strangers witness how deeply the humiliation was cutting into her. She answered her best friend's concerned messages with vague excuses, silently blocked Jared's number after receiving no explanation, and struggled to hold back the tears burning behind her eyes. More painful than being abandoned was realizing how carefully everything had been planned. Weeks of affectionate conversations, promises of romance, and the luxurious reservation had all been part of an elaborate deception. Feeling emotionally exhausted, Harley finally reached for her purse and decided to leave the restaurant behind, convinced she had simply become the victim of an exceptionally cruel prank. But the moment she stood to walk away, the atmosphere changed without warning. The gentle music stopped mid-note. Conversations died instantly, and an unsettling silence spread across the elegant dining room. On a buwan, frightened diners turned toward the entrance as heavily armed men in immaculate suits stepped inside, clearing the restaurant with frightening efficiency. At their center walked a man whose commanding presence froze everyone in place. Tall, impeccably dressed, and radiating quiet authority. Cassian Moretti, the city's most feared syndicate boss, entered as though the entire building belonged to him. Wealthy patrons hurried toward the kitchen exits without daring to ask questions, while terrified employees remained frozen behind the service counter. Harley could only watch in stunned disbelief as Cassian ignored every empty table in the restaurant and walked directly toward hers. Without asking permission, he slid into the chair that had been reserved for Jared. his piercing gray eyes fixed on Harley with unsettling intensity. In that instant, she realized her disastrous blind date had never been a simple act of rejection. Something far darker had brought the most dangerous man in Chicago to her table. And her nightmare was only beginning. The silence that swept through the restaurant felt heavier than any scream. Conversations stopped instantly. Silverware remained suspended in trembling hands. And every pair of eyes turned toward the entrance as 4 impeccably dressed men stepped inside with calm, calculated precision. Their tailored suits concealed the weapons beneath them, and the disciplined way they spread across the dining room made it painfully clear they were not ordinary bodyguards. Without raising their voices, they secured every exit while the restaurant manager, who had earlier treated Harley with quiet indifference, now stood pale with fear. On a B1, wealthy diners abandoned their unfinished meals and hurried toward the kitchen without daring to protest. The luxurious atmosphere that had symbolized romance only moments before transformed into something cold, oppressive, and terrifying. Then the man they all feared entered. Cassian Moretti walked through the doors with the effortless confidence of someone who never questioned his authority. He did not need to introduce himself. His reputation had long spoken louder than words. As the ruthless leader of Chicago's most powerful syndicate, his name alone inspired fear throughout the city. Every movement was controlled, every glance deliberate, and the silence surrounding him was far more intimidating than violence itself. Harley remained frozen in her seat, unable to understand what was happening. Her heart pounded violently as countless frightening possibilities rushed through her mind. She wondered if the restaurant was being robbed, if she had somehow become trapped in the middle of a gang war, or worse, if she was about to be kidnapped. Instinct urged her to run with everyone else. Yet her legs refused to move. She could only watch as Cassian ignored every empty table in the restaurant and walked directly toward her. Without asking permission, he slid into the chair that had been reserved for Jared, placing himself exactly where her blind date was supposed to be sitting. The image felt surreal. Just minutes earlier, she had been waiting for the man she believed might change her lonely life forever. Instead, she found herself face to face with the most dangerous man in Chicago. Cassian studied her silently before speaking in a calm voice that somehow carried even greater menace than shouting. His first question caught Harley completely off guard. He wanted to know where Jared Tompkins was. Confused and terrified, she admitted she had no idea what he was talking about. Believing she was lying, Cassian slowly revealed the truth piece by piece. Jared had never been the charming software developer described in his dating profile. He had worked as a trusted accountant inside the Moretti syndicate, managing financial records and overseeing secret shipping accounts. Only days earlier, he had betrayed the organization by stealing nearly $4 million and disappearing together with highly confidential financial data. Before fleeing, Jared had convinced Cassian's men that he would meet his partner at the restaurant to exchange the stolen information. That promise had brought the syndicate directly to Harley's table. As Cassian continued explaining the situation, every affectionate message Jared had ever sent suddenly took on a far darker meaning. The perfect gentleman Harley thought she knew had never existed. The horrifying truth settled over her like freezing water. Jared had not forgotten the date. He had never intended to come at all. Every compliment, every late-night conversation, every promise of a romantic future had been carefully designed to manipulate her into becoming part of his escape. Knowing Cassian's men were watching him, Jared had deliberately chosen a crowded luxury restaurant and arranged an obvious blind date so the syndicate would focus its attention there while he vanished unnoticed. Harley had not been stood up by an inconsiderate man. She had been transformed into an innocent decoy, a disposable shield meant to distract some of the most dangerous criminals in the city. The realization shattered the last illusion she still held about him. For several long seconds, Cassian expected Harley to collapse in tears or beg for mercy. Instead, something entirely different happened. The fear that had paralyzed her moments earlier was swallowed by pure outrage. She slammed her hand against the table, her voice echoing through the nearly empty dining room as she cursed Jared with a fury that surprised even herself. She mocked every fake compliment he had given her, every romantic promise he had whispered, and every lie he had invented simply to exploit her trust. She admitted how much effort she had invested in preparing for the evening, how desperately she had wanted to believe someone could genuinely love her, only to discover she had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's escape plan. Her anger was raw, honest, and completely fearless. Rather than pleading with the mafia boss sitting across from her, Harley vented every ounce of humiliation she had endured throughout the night. Cassian watched her closely, expecting manipulation or deception but finding only heartbreak and undeniable sincerity. The woman before him was clearly not Jared's accomplice. She was simply another victim of his betrayal. As Harley's emotions finally settled, Cassian reached a conclusion that changed everything. He no longer doubted her innocence. Every instinct told him she had been used just as cruelly as his organization had. Unfortunately, innocence offered no protection in his world. Jared's enemies, rival syndicat, and anyone searching for the missing fortune would inevitably assume Harley possessed valuable information. Whether she knew it or not, she had already become part of a deadly conflict that could not simply be escaped by walking away. Looking directly into her frightened eyes, Cassian made a decision without asking for her permission. She could not return to her ordinary life because the moment Jared chose her as his decoy, her safety had disappeared forever. If she remained alone, she would become an easy target for everyone hunting the stolen money. There was only one place left where she might survive the protection of the man she had feared only moments before. As Cassian ordered his men to prepare the car, Harley realized the nightmare she believed had ended with a failed blind date was only beginning. The journey to Cassian Moretti's estate felt unreal, as though Harley had been pulled from one life and thrust into another without warning. She sat silently inside a reinforced SUV, surrounded by thick bulletproof glass and escorted by a convoy of black vehicles that moved through Chicago's rain-soaked streets with military precision. Armed guards occupied every seat, speaking only when absolutely necessary, while the city's glittering skyline gradually disappeared behind them. Eventually, the convoy descended into a heavily secured underground garage, accessible only through multiple security checkpoints. From there, a private elevator carried Harley to the top floor of an enormous penthouse that resembled more of a royal palace than a residence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the entire city. Rare works of art decorated the walls, and every detail reflected unimaginable wealth and unquestionable authority. The lavish surroundings only reminded Harley how completely powerless she was. Standing inside the home of the city's most feared syndicate leader, she could not shake the terrifying thought that she might never leave alive. Despite her fear, the violence she expected never came. Cassian did not threaten her, interrogate her, or treat her as a criminal. Instead, he instructed his staff to prepare a private suite, offered her food and clean clothes, and assured her that no one inside the building would harm her. Although his calm demeanor remained intimidating, Harley gradually realized he had no intention of punishing her. In his eyes, she was no longer an enemy but someone caught in circumstances she neither understood nor created. Even so, the atmosphere remained unbearably tense. Cassian knew Jared had disappeared with millions of dollars belonging to the syndicate, and every passing minute increased the risk that the stolen fortune would vanish forever. While Harley tried to process everything that had happened, Cassian's trusted lieutenant, Enzo, continuously coordinated search teams across the city. Reports poured in from airports, train stations, bus terminals, private marinas, and highway checkpoints. Surveillance footage was reviewed repeatedly. Safe houses were raided, and every known associate connected to Jared was questioned. yet every lead ended in failure. It was as though Jared had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and growing frustration. Watching the increasingly desperate search unfold, Harley desperately replayed the previous 3 weeks in her mind, hoping to remember something that might help. Every conversation with Jared suddenly seemed suspicious. Every compliment, every carefully chosen word, every romantic gesture now carried the weight of hidden motives. Then a seemingly insignificant memory surfaced. Just before leaving for the restaurant that evening, Jared had sent her a message containing what he described as an exclusive digital menu prepared especially for VIP guests. He had insisted she download the file before arriving and even reminded her several times to keep it open on her phone, claiming the maître d'hôtel need to see it. At the time, Harley had dismissed the strange request as part of the restaurant's luxury service, especially after the attachment repeatedly crashed whenever she tried to open it. Until that moment, she had completely forgotten about the mysterious file. The instant Harley mentioned the message, the mood inside the penthouse shifted. Cassian crossed the room in seconds, his sharp instincts immediately sensing that the forgotten attachment could be far more important than anyone had realized. Under his instructions, the syndicate's cybersecurity specialists carefully extracted the encrypted file from Harley's phone. What initially appeared to be an ordinary restaurant menu slowly revealed layer after layer of sophisticated encryption. As the technicians bypassed the security protocols, hidden databases emerged on the screens before them. Routing numbers, offshore banking records, shell corporation accounts, confidential shipping ledgers, and the complete financial architecture of the Moretti syndicate appeared one document after another. The room fell silent. Jared had never carried the stolen information with him. Instead, he had concealed the entire fortune inside Harley's phone, disguising it as an innocent attachment that no one would suspect. Without realizing it, she had transported the syndicate's most valuable secrets everywhere she went. She had never been chosen because Jared cared about her. She had been selected because she was invisible to everyone else, a woman no criminal would ever think to search. The realization struck Harley harder than every humiliation she had endured in the restaurant combined. Her relationship with Jared had never been real. The affection, the late-night conversations, the endless compliments about her beauty, and every promise of a future together had all been carefully manufactured to manipulate her into becoming the perfect courier. She had not been his girlfriend. She had been a living storage device carrying millions of dollars worth of stolen information without even knowing it. Every painful memory suddenly made sense, leaving her overwhelmed by betrayal rather than heartbreak. She no longer questioned why Jared had abandoned her that night. From the very beginning, she had existed only as a convenient tool in his carefully orchestrated escape plan for Cassian. However, Harley had become something entirely different. Recovering the encrypted data restored control over his financial empire, but his attention increasingly focused on the woman who had unknowingly saved it. The suspicion that had once filled his gaze disappeared completely, replaced by genuine respect for her honesty and remarkable resilience. Rather than treating Harley as evidence in an ongoing investigation, he began, including her in conversations, explaining the dangers surrounding Jared's disappearance, and ensuring she remained under constant protection. His concern extended beyond simple obligation. He noticed the quiet strength hidden beneath her insecurities, admired the courage she displayed, despite overwhelming fear, and found himself increasingly unwilling to let anyone exploit her again. Harley also began seeing a different side of the feared syndicate leader. Behind the ruthless reputation stood a man governed by discipline, loyalty, and an unwavering sense of responsibility toward those under his protection. What had begun as an accidental encounter between a frightened civilian and a notorious mafia boss slowly evolved into an unexpected bond built on trust. Without either of them fully realizing it, the relationship between Harley and Cassian had already begun to change. laying the foundation for a romance neither of them had ever anticipated. The encrypted file hidden inside Harley's phone was successfully unlocked in less than half an hour, revealing exactly what Cassian had feared. Layer after layer of sophisticated encryption gave way to an enormous archive containing offshore banking routes, shell corporations, confidential shipping records, and every financial pathway Jared had stolen from the Moretti syndicate. With a single discovery, Cassian regained control of his empire. The missing $4 million could now be traced, the compromised accounts secured, and the evidence of Jared's betrayal preserved beyond dispute. Relief swept through the operations room, but Cassian remained unusually quiet. Recovering the stolen information solved only half of the problem. The man responsible for the theft was still free, desperate enough to do anything necessary to survive. Everyone understood that Jared would eventually realize his plan had failed. And when he did, he would come looking for the one person he believed still possessed the encrypted file. Their prediction proved correct shortly after midnight when Harley's phone suddenly vibrated across the glass table. The screen displayed an unknown number. Yet, before answering, she somehow knew exactly who was calling. Cassian met her eyes and gave a slow nod, silently encouraging her to continue, while Enzo activated the recording equipment surrounding the room. Harley steadied her breathing before answering the call on speakerphone. Jared's familiar voice immediately filled the silence, sounding exhausted, frightened, and almost convincing. He apologized repeatedly for abandoning her at the restaurant, claiming an unexpected emergency had forced him to disappear without explanation. His words overflowed with regret as he insisted that dangerous people were chasing him and begged Harley to trust him one last time. He spoke with the same gentle tone that had won her heart only weeks earlier, carefully choosing every sentence to revive the emotional connection he believed still existed between them. Listening to him, Harley could almost recognize the charming man she had once imagined building a future with. But this time she understood every word was another carefully calculated performance. Determined to expose his true intentions, Harley resisted the urge to confront him immediately. Instead, she calmly asked why he had vanished without a single message and questioned the strange digital menu he had insisted she download before dinner. Jared answered cautiously at first, inventing increasingly elaborate excuses about work emergencies, criminal threats, and technical problems. He insisted the file contained something extremely important and pleaded with Harley to bring her phone to him as quickly as possible. The longer the conversation continued, however, the more impatient he became. Harley deliberately hesitated, pretending she was too frightened to leave her apartment, while subtly asking why the information mattered so much. The questions disrupted Jared's carefully rehearsed story. His breathing grew heavier, his patience evaporated, and the mask of kindness that had hidden his true personality finally cracked beyond repair. The transformation was immediate and horrifying. Gone was the affectionate man who had complimented Harley's appearance and promised to treat her like the most beautiful woman in the world. In his place emerged someone cruel, arrogant, and utterly contemptuous. Jared mocked her appearance with vicious insults, laughing at the insecurities he had spent weeks pretending to heal. He admitted he had never loved her, never admired her curves, and never intended to share a future with her. Every compliment had been nothing more than bait designed to manipulate an emotionally vulnerable woman into carrying stolen data without suspicion. To him, Harley had never been a partner. She had been the perfect disguise, a lonely woman nobody would ever think to search. When she continued questioning him instead of obeying his demands, his frustration exploded into open threats. He swore that if she refused to deliver the phone immediately, he would hunt her down personally and make her regret crossing him. The call that Harley had once dreamed would end in love instead revealed the ugliest truth imaginable. Every illusion she had clung to was shattered beyond repair, leaving behind nothing but anger and absolute clarity. Throughout the conversation, Cassian remained completely silent. He did not interrupt, raise his voice, or display the explosive rage his men expected. Yet the stillness surrounding him felt infinitely more terrifying than any outburst. His expression hardened with every insult Jared directed toward Harley. Especially when he heard the contemptuous remarks about her appearance and learned how deliberately Jared had manipulated her deepest insecurities. The room itself seemed colder as Cassian slowly rose from his chair, his gray eyes reflecting a calm determination that unsettled everyone around him. When the call finally ended, he issued only a handful of quiet instructions. His words were measured, almost emotionless, but each carried the unmistakable certainty of a death sentence. The trap would be prepared immediately. Jared believed he was luring Harley into an isolated meeting. Instead, he was walking directly into the reach of the man he had betrayed. An hour later, several black SUVs disappeared into the thick fog surrounding an abandoned shipping terminal along the riverfront. Towering cargo containers created narrow corridors of steel, while broken floodlights cast long shadows across rain-soaked concrete. The distant sound of water crashing against the docks echoed through the darkness, making the deserted harbor feel even more isolated. Hidden among the containers, dozens of Cassian's armed men silently took their positions, waiting for a single signal. Harley stepped out of the lead vehicle wearing the same emerald dress that had become a painful reminder of everything Jared had stolen from her. To protect her from the cold night air, Cassian gently draped his expensive overcoat across her shoulders before reminding her that no harm would come to her as long as she trusted him. For the first time since the nightmare began, Harley walked forward without trembling. Fear still lingered deep inside her, but it no longer controlled her actions. Jared emerged from the fog looking nothing like the confident man Harley remembered. His designer suit was wrinkled, his face unshaven, and exhaustion clouded his eyes. Desperation had replaced charm. Clutching a pistol with visibly shaking hands, he demanded the phone while nervously glancing over his shoulder, convinced rival syndicates might appear at any moment. Harley refused to move, staring calmly at the man who had spent weeks manipulating her emotions. Instead of handing over the device, she confronted him with the truth. She called him a coward, accused him of exploiting innocent people to save himself, and reminded him that every promise he had made had been a lie. Humiliated and cornered, Jared abandoned all pretense. He aimed the weapon directly at Harley's chest, screaming insults and threatening to kill her if she refused to cooperate. Before he could take another step, a familiar voice echoed across the deserted pier. Cassian emerged from the shadows with the quiet confidence of a man who never doubted the outcome. On. Heavily armed guards surrounded the area until every possible escape route disappeared. Jared's confidence collapsed instantly. The pistol slipped from his trembling fingers as he fell to his knees, desperately begging for mercy. He blamed rival syndicates, claimed he had been forced into betrayal, and promised to return every dollar if Cassian spared his life. None of the excuses mattered. Cassian ignored him completely and walked instead toward Harley, placing a protective arm around her waist in full view of the terrified fugitive. The simple gesture carried far greater meaning than any threat. It declared exactly where Harley now belonged, and made it painfully clear that Jared had lost every ounce of power he once believed he possessed. Looking directly at Harley rather than the broken man kneeling before them, Cassian asked a single question that transformed the entire story. Does he live? Or does he die? The decision no longer belonged to the mafia boss. It belonged to the woman Jared had considered weak enough to manipulate. Harley looked at the frightened man who had mocked her appearance, exploited her loneliness, and nearly sacrificed her life for his own survival. Surprisingly, she felt no fear, no sadness, and no lingering affection. Those emotions had already disappeared the moment she understood who he truly was. The insecure woman who had waited 3 heartbreaking hours in an empty restaurant no longer existed. Standing beside Cassian, Harley finally recognized her own strength. Without raising her voice or shedding another tear, she delivered her answer with calm certainty. Jared had made his choice long before that night, and now he would face the consequences of it. In that moment, Harley ceased to be a victim of betrayal and became the woman who reclaimed complete control over her own destiny. The confrontation at the abandoned pier ended almost as quickly as it had begun. Jared's desperate pleas, frantic excuses, and empty promises no longer held any power. The man who had once manipulated everyone around him with charm and deception now knelt helplessly before the very people he had betrayed. Harley watched him in complete silence, surprised by the absence of fear inside her. Only a few hours earlier, the thought of hearing Jared raise his voice would have shattered her confidence. Now, as he begged for his life, she felt nothing but calm certainty. The person who had broken her heart no longer possessed the ability to control her emotions. His fate was no longer her burden to carry. He had willingly sacrificed innocent lives to protect himself, and the consequences of those choices had finally caught up with him. As Cassian's men escorted Jared away into the darkness, his desperate cries gradually disappeared beneath the sound of the river, bringing an unmistakable sense of closure to the betrayal that had changed Harley's life forever. Standing beneath the cold night sky, Harley quietly reflected on everything that had happened in the span of a single evening. She remembered the lonely woman who had entered an elegant restaurant filled with nervous excitement, believing she was about to begin a beautiful new chapter. She remembered checking the entrance every few minutes, convincing herself that Jared would surely arrive, refusing to admit she had been abandoned. She remembered the embarrassment of sitting alone while strangers looked at her with sympathy, wondering whether she simply was not beautiful enough to deserve love. Those painful memories still existed, but they no longer defined who she was. The frightened woman who questioned her worth had disappeared somewhere between the restaurant and the deserted pier. In her place stood someone who had survived betrayal, stared down danger, and refused to let the cruelty of one man determine the rest of her life. Harley had not changed because someone rescued her. She had changed because she finally recognized the strength that had always existed within her, even when she had been unable to see it herself. Cassian observed that transformation with quiet admiration. Throughout the night, he had witnessed Harley endure humiliation, deception, fear, and heartbreak without allowing any of those experiences to destroy her spirit. The respect he felt for her extended far beyond gratitude for recovering the stolen data. She had shown remarkable courage despite having every reason to collapse under the weight of impossible circumstances. Walking toward her, Cassian gently lifted her chin until their eyes met. There was no trace of suspicion remaining in his expression. She was no longer the woman mistakenly believed to be Jared's accomplice, nor the innocent stranger caught in the middle of a criminal conspiracy. In front of his most trusted men, Cassian publicly acknowledged her place beside him with a single sentence that carried extraordinary meaning. "You are not bait," he said quietly. "You are not a witness. You are not collateral damage." After a brief pause, his voice softened into something unexpectedly warm. "You are my queen." The words echoed through the silent pier, leaving no room for misunderstanding. In the eyes of the Moretti syndicate, Harley Bennett was no longer an outsider. She had become someone worthy of respect, protection, and unwavering loyalty. For Harley, those words meant far more than power or status. Throughout her life, she had searched for acceptance in the wrong places, hoping someone would eventually see beauty beyond her appearance. Jared had recognized her loneliness only to exploit it for his own benefit. Cassian, despite his dangerous reputation, saw something entirely different. He valued her honesty, her resilience, and the quiet courage she displayed when confronted with impossible choices. He never asked her to become someone else or apologize for who she was. For the first time, Harley felt genuinely seen rather than merely noticed. She did not choose to remain beside Cassian because he was wealthy or feared by the city. She chose him because, beneath the intimidating exterior of the syndicate leader, she found someone who respected her in ways she had never experienced before. His protection was not ownership. It was recognition of the woman she had always been beneath years of insecurity and self-doubt. As dawn slowly approached, the first rays of sunlight stretched across Chicago's skyline, signaling the beginning of an entirely different chapter. Harley stood beside Cassian overlooking the city, no longer wondering whether she deserved happiness. The frightened woman who had waited alone inside a luxury restaurant had become someone capable of standing confidently beside the most powerful man in Chicago without losing herself in his shadow. Their future remained uncertain. The world Cassian ruled was dangerous, unpredictable, and filled with enemies waiting for opportunities to strike. Harley understood that choosing to remain by his side would never guarantee an easy life. Yet she also knew that returning to the person she had been before that disastrous blind date was impossible. She had discovered her own strength, reclaimed her dignity, and found someone who valued her for qualities far deeper than appearance. Whether Harley had truly found the love she had always dreamed of, or had simply exchanged one uncertain future for another, remained an unanswered question. Perhaps life beside the city's most feared syndicate leader would bring dangers she could never imagine. Or perhaps, after years of believing she was invisible, she had finally met the one person capable of seeing her exactly as she was. As Harley and Cassian walked away together toward an uncertain tomorrow, the answer was left for the audience to decide. If you were in Harley's position, would you embrace a future beside a man as dangerous as Cassian Moretti if he truly saw your worth? Or would you walk away from a world where love and danger could never be separated?